I want to just give one really sort of extended example of dynamism and diversity. And then in the next little videoette, an introduction into your assignment here. But those of you who've been around the church for a while will know that we in the Episcopal Church have been debating the role of confirmation in the church. And if you don't know where the roots of this debate are found, early in Christianity, outside the New Testament period, but early on, baptism and what we now call confirmation were pretty much done at the same time. The whole question was, are you in communion with the bishop? And so you would be baptized and then have chrism marked on you, and usually that was done by the bishop. And that is still the case in the Eastern churches. They don't talk about it as confirmation. They talk about it as chrismation, the act of anointing with baptismal chrism. But in the West, it shifted in very, very different ways, and partly because of the cultural context, the theological context. If you've had your church history class, you'll remember this, and if you haven't had it, you'll hear about it. Controversies in North Africa over Donatism, whether or not you might want to renounce your Christianity to keep from having your head cut off, and then when things calm down, say, I want to come back in. And so you've already been baptized, but you want to come back in and assert, have yourself found under the authority of a bishop. And, so the bishop would call you in, and you'd have to go through all of these questions and answers and return. And the bishop would receive you back into communion with the church. And we hear this, you heard this, a reference to this on Ash Wednesday in the charge at the very beginning. This season of Lent provided a time in which converts to the faith were prepared for holy baptism. It was also a time when those who, because of notorious sins, had been separated from the body of faithful were reconciled by penitence and forgiveness and restored to the fellowship of the church. Some of those notorious sins were renunciation of the faith. So on the one hand, we've got this confirmation, this reassertion of your affiliation with the bishop. But on the second thing, and very different than the Eastern context, was that as the church spread through Europe, there were all of these little congregations where there was a priest in charge, but the bishop was a long ways away and might not make it around once every year, like he or she does in the United States in our tradition. And so how are you going to have the bishop, if the bishop is the one who baptizes, how do you do that if he's not going to show up, especially if you're concerned about the baby dying unbaptized? So in the West, the priests were given the authority to baptize, and then when the bishop came around, the bishop would confirm that baptism. Well, again, times have changed. We don't have the same theology of baptism and confirmation. For us, baptism is full initiation into the church. It has nothing to do with whether or not a bishop has laid hands on you. Once you are baptized, you are a full member in the Church of Christ. That's what we affirm. So how do we deal with this unity, this diversity, this dynamism, when we've got now a practice that has become, in many respects, a rite of passage, a Christian equivalent to a bar mitzvah or bat mitzvah? Can we get rid of confirmation? What does it look like? What does it mean if we've got adults who were baptized at some point, didn't grow up in the Episcopal Church, but want to come in, and they weren't part of one of the other churches that we receive members from, the Lutherans or the Orthodox or the Roman Catholics, people who have been perhaps baptized in a communion where there's an apostolic succession or something like that. So we have this tension in the church. We want to be faithful to our origins, to the New Testament, to what bishops were doing as the church developed. But then we find ourselves in a very, very different position right now, and we have to struggle with the tension between diversity, well, they do it this way, they do it this way, and dynamism. Things have changed. How do we handle all those kinds of things? That's one of the tricky things that the church is trying to navigate its way through right now, is how do we deal with that diversity and dynamism. And we see it not just in the Episcopal Church in the United States, but I think that is one of the big issues that lies behind how we're working with churches outside of North America or outside the Northern Hemisphere when we talk about dynamism, diversity. Do we have to be the same? Is diversity, can we have diversity, or do we demand uniformity? Those are some of the problems that the Archbishop of Canterbury and the Anglican Consultative Council and all of those folks are working with. Is there union without uniformity? Can we have diversity? And how does all of that relate to dynamism?